Tens of thousands of mourners have flooded into St. Peter's Square for the funeral of Pope Francis. Some people waited overnight to be first in the queue for the ceremony. These are live visuals coming from Vatican City, and any moment from now, the funeral proceedings and the Mass will be held. While leaders have attended this ceremony ahead of the funeral, US President Donald Trump arrived in Rome along with his wife and First Lady Melania Trump. He will be paying his final respects to the former leader of the Roman Catholic. The ceremony is due to begin at 800 GMT. More than 50 heads of state and other dignitaries are set to attend the late pontiff's funeral today. Earlier, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Rome. French President Emmanuel Macron, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, other world leaders paid their respects yesterday at St. Peter's Basilica ahead of the funeral today. Indian President Draupadi Murmu is representing India. She paid her final respects to Pope Francis. She will also be attending the Mass ahead of the funeral today. Let me just tell you what is going to happen from this hour on, or what you're seeing on your screens. As you can see, thousands have marshaled together to attend the late pontiff's funeral. Now, this is a 6-kilometer journey that will take place about half an hour, leaving via the Porta del Perugino and then following the route indicated by the Castera. Now, the Castera of St. Peter's Square is already fortified with preventive ground clearance and drones at the Castera. This is to guarantee a bird's eye view with 3D imagery. That's the view you see on your screen. The route partly follows the ancient Via Papalis, which the popes traveled in procession after their election and consecration in St. Peter's to reach the Lantern Basilica, which is the seat of the episcopal chair. Along the way, Pope Francis's coffin will pass a symbolic place or several symbolic places, such as the Colosseum, which hosts the traditional celebration of the Via Crucis on Good Friday, and the Piazza Venezia. Now, some 2,000 local police officers are on duty. They will be joined by thousands more from the National Security Forces. Security measures include patrols on the Tiber, drones, an army device to neutralize hostile flying objects, and snipers. And the streets are already closed to traffic around the Vatican as we speak. Authorities are assessing the best route for the procession that will take the coffin from the funeral to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, or St. Mary Major, where Francis chose to be buried. But before that, there will be a Mass which will be held, and which world leaders are currently attending at St. Peter's Square. Let's just listen in for a moment.
The reading of a document listing the stages of Jorge Mario Bergoglio's life and his most important activities as Pope. It stated that the memory of the 266th Pope remains in the hearts of the Church and of all humanity. Archbishop Diego Ravelli, master of pontifical liturgical ceremonies, spread a white silk cloth over the face of the Pope.
All right, so this is live at the Vatican, and any moment from now, the Mass will begin. And before that, the Vatican had already declared a 9-day period, which is called the Novendiales Masses, which begins today. Each day, a cardinal chosen by the late Pope presides over a Requiem Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, Red is the liturgical color of the Novendiales masses, which follow the Ordo Exequerium Romanti Pontificis 2024. Let's now talk to Christopher Hale, who's joining us from Rome, Italy. He is a political analyst and has worked for former US Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Christopher Hale, thank you for joining us. We are talking about the funeral of the late pontiff. What happens from here? Because there is a 9-day mourning period that has been set by the Vatican, and I've just read 1 day will be conducted, or a requiem mass will be conducted by a cardinal who was chosen by the late Pope. So what happens next?
Well, we begin this period of mourning, as you said, but of course Pope Francis has been deceased now for a week. I think after today's funeral, we'll really start transitioning towards the speculation of who the next pontiff will be. I will note, being here in Rome, it is remarkable. The streets are filled to the brim. Yesterday was a holiday here in Italy. There's great affection for the Roman pontiff, for Francis and his 12-year papacy. And I would say there is maybe some apprehension on what's next. Francis was considered a more progressive pope. It's very likely that his successor will not have the same progressive bona fides, but the Pope was supposed to be a unifier, the entire church. And I think all of us Catholics hope the next Pope is a unifier. Francis is beloved, as we see today. And it's hoped that his successor will be someone who can uplift that legacy of Francis, of being outgoing, being welcoming, and being an incredible, really, icon for the church globally.
Hale, stay with me. Pope Francis, in accordance with his personal wishes, expressed in his final testament that he will not be buried at the Vatican grottos, but instead at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, a basilica that he visited more than 100 times during his papacy, before and after his international trips in devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Hale, what's the significance of this Pope's decision to be buried at St. Mary Major?
It's a great question. Really, I think it really represents two things. Pope Francis does have, every Pope does, but he has a particular patronage, affection for the Marian vista of the church, Mary being the mother of Jesus. It's a feminist reality, but it's also something that all popes have had a particular affection for, but his is distinct. But I think there's really a second thing that's more, maybe perhaps even more noteworthy. Francis is a Jesuit, religious order, but speaking in India, St. Francis Xavier being the first Jesuit to go to India, and of course globally as well. Religious order popes have oftentimes been buried outside of Vatican grottos, and Francis continues that tradition. I think one of the most remarkable things that will happen today, and I don't think it's really on people's minds, is there will be a procession here in Rome from the Vatican to Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary Major. And it will be a procession that your viewers might remember that happened with Princess Diana when she died in 1997, or the late President John F. Kennedy of the United States in 1963. I think it will be a remarkable image that we'll see across the world here.
Hale, stay with me. The ceremony is being attended by heads of state, including US President Donald Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump. Religious leaders from across the world are attending the ceremony, and thousands of faithful from around the world, like you see on your screens. There are thousands who are attending this very important day, not only for the Catholic Church, but for the world. At the end of the Mass, the traditional Antiphon in Paradisum is sung, asking for the angels to guide the Pope's soul to heaven. That is what will happen in a short while from now. Christopher, I want us to talk about Novendiales and the significance of Novendiales. This is the 9-day mourning period which the Vatican announced that will start today after the Pope is buried.
Yes, and I think this. So this is a tradition that Francis is not the first one to do this. It's centuries-old tradition in the Catholic Church. It serves two purposes, honestly. The first purpose, of course, is to remember the late Holy Father and his great contribution to the Church and the world. But there's also really a second part too. It's to allow time to begin the process of electing his successor. As you know, the Catholic Church has cardinals, over 130 cardinals coming to elect the successor of St. Peter, probably in early May. But these people don't really know each other. They're from every nation across the globe, every continent across the globe at least. And this allows a period to begin developing those friendships, those relationships, so that we can get a better sense, so they can get a better sense of each other, of the situation at hand, and what qualities they really want to see in Francis' successor, the next Pope.
Christopher, now that you've mentioned it, I think has been a lot of debate concerning Pope Francis's potential successor. I'll just read a few names that we know or we have in our possession. Pietro Parolin, who's a 70-year-old Italian. He's considered to be softly spoken. Italian Cardinal Parolin was a Vatican Secretary of State under Pope Francis. Luis Antonio Gokim Tagle, I think this cardinal has been very popular on social media. He's a 67-year-old Filipino and has decades of pastoral experience, meaning he has been an active church leader among the people as opposed to a diplomat for the Vatican or cloistered expert on church law. But what is interesting are the three black cardinals that people have been saying would be the chosen successors of Pope Francis. What do you make of the discussion surrounding the three cardinals from Congo, Ghana, and I believe the other one is still from Congo?
Yes, I think the name that's getting a lot of traction is Cardinal Robert Sarah, and Cardinal Sarah is he's a conservative. He is of course, a black cardinal. He really kind of represents, I would say, what some call, and this comes off a little bit aggressive, but they call themselves radical traditionalists, and those are folks who are disappointed with the Francis papacy and think he was too loose, too open-minded in some ways. He didn't do enough to protect the teachings of the faith. And Robert Sarah really represents, I think, the coalescing of those who've had that opinion. I will say this. I think the second one is that I would say that Peter Turkson is a name that had a lot of consideration 12 years ago when Pope Francis was elected Pope. And in many ways, he's past his prime, but that was the same thing they said about Pope Francis, is that he was too old to be elected Pope. Look, here's the risk with the other names you named. People live longer. Pope Francis was the second oldest Pope in history. We can imagine the life expectancy of these men are around 90 years old. Every name you did there, Cardinal Tagle, Pietro Parolin, if those age expectancies last, that is a 20-year papacy. And cardinals sometimes don't like electing for a pope for such a long period because essentially they don't have a chance to have a second say if they don't like the direction they're going in. That's why I think you need to look out for Cardinal Turkson. I think he actually represents a good compromise. He reminds me a lot of Francis as well in 2013.
Well, for the sake of our audience, what Christopher, or the person Christopher is talking about, is Cardinal Peter Codwo Apia Turkson. He's 76 years old. He's Ghanaian. If chosen by his peers, the influential Cardinal Turkson would likewise have the distinction of being the first African Pope for 1,500 years. Christopher, coming back to you, let's talk about Luis Antonio Joaquim Tagle. He's a Filipino, and I think he's the second youngest contender at age 67.
Yes, I think Cardinal Tagle would really represent a total success of the Francis Revolution, the Francis makeover of the Catholic Church. He is, I think, in every way possible, the heir apparent of the Francis legacy. I think the biggest issue he has is that there are some, perhaps enough, who don't like that legacy. Now, note that Francis did select 80% of the cardinals, but that's a complicated reality. As I said earlier, these people don't know each other. Benedict XVI and his predecessor, John Paul II, elected 100% of the cardinals who chose Jorge Mario Bergoglio in 2013. And I'm not sure he would have been their first pick. So I think there's a lot of possibility here for surprises. And I think that anyone who tells you they know what's happening is selling you a bill of goods. We have no clue how this will turn out. We should expect surprises.
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, we are live at the Vatican City, and any moment from now, the Requiem Mass, or the Mass for the funeral of the late Pope Francis, is about to begin. World leaders, the Catholic faithful, and people from around the world have assembled at the Vatican City. This is at the St. Peter's Square, the Basilica at St. Peter's Square. And what you see on your screen, that's the coffin which has the remains of the late pontiff, who will be buried in a few hours from now. The ceremony, or the Mass, is about to happen as they await for world leaders to assemble here at the Vatican City. Let's just dip in for a moment and listen in. We'll be right back.
It was on May 20th, 1992, when Pope John Paul II named him titular Bishop of Auca and Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires. He chose as his episcopal motto, Miserando adque eligendo, and inserted the Christogram IHS, the symbol of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, into his coat of arms.
Later, on June 3rd, 1997, he was promoted to the role of coadjutor Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and then upon Cardinal Corracino's death, he succeeded him in February 1998 as the Archbishop and Primate of Argentina. He was also...
Let me just give you a glimpse of the security arrangements at the Vatican City. Streets have been closed to traffic around the Vatican. Authorities are assessing the best route for the procession that will take the coffin from the funeral to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, or St. Mary Major, where Francis chose to be buried. Authorities have announced a no-fly zone over the capital for this week. It will have to juggle a steady flow of VIP jets and state planes landing at Rome's airports for the event. The military airport of Pratica di Mare, south of Rome, will be a backup to the two city airports of Fiumicino and Ciampino in case of need. We also understand that the National Railway Company will add some 260,000 seats to its trains to the capital. In addition to the security arrangements, there's also a health strategy organized by the Lazio region. So this is what is happening at the Vatican City. Christopher Hill is still with us. Talk to us, or take us through again the procession, the funeral procession of the late pontiff. What happens from here onwards? Christopher?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I apologize. It's obviously quite a chaotic scene out here. So after the funeral, he will process the body of Pope Francis. Will process in a closed casket across Rome. It will go at a walking pace. He will then head off to Santa Maria Maggiore, and at that point he will be buried in a very simple casket in Santa Maria Maggiore. But I think it will be that procession that will be remarkable. I think Rome is packed today. Rome is packed today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think that the reality of it is that will probably be the most poignant moment of this event. The Mass, obviously, to some is a little complicated, especially the non-Catholics, but people understand our procession. And I imagine your visuals will be quite beautiful, quite profound. And the streets of Rome are lined. People are unable to get into the area closest to the Mass, but they are able to be on the streets of Rome when Pope Francis' body will process, when the casket will process. One person I spoke to this morning said that they had been there since 2 a.m. And that is the truth of all over, is people are spending the night here. People want to be close to the Holy Father as we lay him to rest. It's a scene quite unlike any other I've seen. I've been to inaugurations, I've been to funerals of presidents. This is different in kind. This is a big event. I can tell that the folks here have worked hard to be here.
He was the people's pope, as we call him, and that's why there's a huge turnout of thousands of people who may or may not be Catholic, who are paying homage to the late pontiff. Christopher, I understand that the cortege will not be passing through St. Peter's Square. Maybe you can tell us or confirm to us if this is the case and why that has been put across. And also, as you answer that, at midnight tonight, a green zone will begin operating. Tell us more about this green zone.
Yes, and so the fear is, of course, the fear is that with all the security here, it is remarkable. It is more than the inauguration of a president of the United States. There was concerns that they would not be able to secure that area, the Via Conciliazione, the heart of St. Peter's Square. I mean, look, we have 2 U.S. presidents. We have heads of states from over 100 countries. This is the biggest event since the pandemic globally. And so I think the concern is that they want to be secure. They want to have guarantees. And so they made this slight alteration.
Christopher Hale is a political analyst. Christopher, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for talking to us. If you're just joining us, any moment from now, the Mass for the late pontiff is about to begin. Donald Trump and his wife, Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, have already paid homage to the late pontiff. We understand that 50 heads of state are in attendance, and as you can see on your screen, thousands are in attendance to pay their last respects to late Pope Francis. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.